A humble maid who had worked for years serving a powerful family linked to the Mafia was suddenly accused of stealing a valuable sum of money. She was dragged to court without a lawyer, humiliated before the world, and left completely alone against the influence of the criminals. Everyone believed she was guilty because the word of the powerful weighed more than her tears and her truth. But in the middle of the trial, when it seemed that nothing could save her, the unexpected happened. The young daughter of the Mafia boss, who loved her like a second mother, escaped from her nanny, ran to the courtroom, and revealed a shocking secret, changing the entire case forever. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Rosa had worked for the Navarro family for many years. Every day she cleaned the spacious rooms of their fortified mansion, took care of the furniture, cooked meals, and always made sure everything was perfect. She was quiet, respectful, and deeply trustworthy to everyone in the house. Over the years, she grew close to Isabella, the young daughter of Dante Navarro. Isabella loved Rosa very much and saw her as a second mother. Dante Navarro, Isabella's father, was a serious man who had lost his wife some years ago in violent circumstances. He had been raised by his mother, Carmela, a cold and strict woman who liked to control everything. Carmela had never liked Rosa, although she never said it openly. One day, a valuable sum of money from the family's illicit business suddenly disappeared. It had been kept in a secret safe for generations, and Carmela immediately blamed Rosa. She said that Rosa was the only outsider in the house, and it had to be her. Rosa was shocked and confused by the accusation. Carmela didn't wait for an investigation. She went straight to Dante and said that Rosa must have stolen the money. She pointed out that Rosa was poor and probably needed money. Dante, although unsure, trusted his mother's judgment. She had always been firm and persuasive. Rosa tried to explain that she would never do such a thing. She begged them to look for the money again. Maybe someone had placed it somewhere else, but Carmela didn't want to hear it. Dante looked at Rosa and, even without real proof, gave in to his mother's pressure. He told Rosa that she had to leave the mansion. Rosa felt heartbroken. After everything she had done for that family, they believed she was a thief. Dante's trusted men were called. Rosa was taken out of the property. The neighbors watched as she was escorted out in tears. She felt humiliated and betrayed. Her only crime had been working honestly for a family that no longer trusted her. In an isolated room at the back of one of Dante's properties, Rosa sat in silence while men asked questions. They didn't arrest her, but they treated her like a suspect. Rosa had no lawyer, no money, and no one to speak on her behalf. Her world was falling apart. She was allowed to go home, but was told she would have to appear in court soon. The news spread quickly, and people in the area began to whisper behind her back. Her name was now linked to theft, although she had never stolen anything in her life. Rosa returned to her small house and cried for hours. She thought about how her whole life had changed in a single day. The worst part wasn't the court summons or even the public shame. It was losing Isabella. She missed her smile, her questions, her hugs. She had taken care of her like her own daughter. Now she didn't know if she would see her again. In the days that followed, Rosa received a letter from the court. She was being formally accused of stealing the money and had to prepare for trial. Rosa had never been in a courtroom before. She didn't know how the legal system worked. She didn't have money for a lawyer and felt completely lost. She tried to contact some people she knew, but no one wanted to get involved. They were afraid of the Navarro family. They were rich, powerful, and influential, with connections in both the underworld and the authorities. Rosa felt small and powerless. She walked through the streets with her head down, afraid to face anyone. At night, she couldn't sleep. She kept going over everything in her head, the money, the accusation, the coldness in Dante's eyes, the silence of the people around her. Each moment felt like a weight on her chest. She couldn't believe that after so many years of loyalty, she was being left to fight alone, without any help or support. Despite all the pain and confusion, Rosa received a small ray of hope. A few days after the accusation, she heard a knock at her door. It was Isabella. She had run away from the mansion and come to see her. She hugged Rosa tightly and started to cry. She said she didn't believe what her grandmother had said. She told Rosa she missed her and that the house wasn't the same without her. Rosa cried too. She hadn't expected to see her again. Isabella brought her a small drawing she had made. It showed her holding Rosa's hand. That moment gave Rosa strength. Even though she had lost her job, her home in the mansion and her dignity, she had not lost Isabella's love. She was too young to help her with lawyers or money, but her visit reminded Rosa that not everyone had turned their back on her. It gave her the courage to continue. The day of the trial was approaching, and Rosa knew she had to find a way to defend herself. She began to collect anything she could that might help her. Old photographs, letters of recommendation, testimonies from people she had worked for before the Navarros. She visited a legal aid center in the city, hoping someone might help her for free. There, she met a young intern who promised to do what she could, even though she wasn't very experienced. Rosa gave her all the information she had. They went over the events of the day. The money disappeared. She remembered everything, where she had been, what time she cleaned which room, and who else had been in the house. It wasn't much, but it was something. Rosa didn't know if it would be enough, but she was determined to tell the truth. She was going to face the Navarros in court, not as a servant, but as a woman who refused to be crushed by injustice. While Rosa was still trying to understand how she had ended up in such a terrible situation, the Navarro family was already getting ready to win the case. Rosa had no lawyer, no money, and no idea how to deal with a courtroom. She was scared, but tried to stay strong. On the other side, Carmela Navarro wasted no time. She went straight to her private lawyer and hired the best one in the city. His name was Dr. Marcelo Ribeiro, and he was known for never losing a case involving powerful families. Carmela told him to make sure Rosa would be seen as guilty in front of everyone. She wanted the trial to be more than a legal matter. She wanted it to be public and dramatic. Soon newspapers started publishing headlines calling Rosa a thief. News websites and radio shows repeated the same story. Maid steals from the Navarros. Rosa watched her name being destroyed in public before the trial even began. It felt unfair. Dante Navarro noticed how fast everything was moving. He saw how his mother was handling the case, and although he didn't agree with all her decisions, he stayed quiet. Deep inside, he felt uncomfortable. He remembered how Rosa used to take care of Isabella, how she always arrived early, worked hard, and never once gave them any reason to doubt her. But at the same time, he trusted his mother. She had raised him alone and always told him what was best for the family. He didn't know what to believe. Dante tried to avoid media attention and focused on his illegal business, but the guilt stayed in his mind. Every time he passed Rosa's old room, he remembered her. He didn't say anything to the lawyer and didn't try to stop the media attacks. He was stuck between two sides, one full of respect for his mother and another filled with guilt about Rosa. Still, he chose silence. Isabella felt that something was wrong in the house. Rosa wasn't there anymore, and no one explained things properly. She was only a child, but she understood that people were sad and angry. She asked her father many times where Rosa was, but Dante never gave a clear answer. Carmela told Isabella not to worry, saying Rosa had done something bad and wouldn't come back. Isabella didn't believe it. She remembered how Rosa used to sing to her, help with her homework, and make her favorite snacks. She missed her bedtime stories and her warm smile. Nothing felt the same without her. The new staff didn't know how to take care of her like Rosa did. One night, Isabella drew a picture of her and Rosa, just like the one she had given before. She kept it hidden in her drawer. Deep down, she hoped that one day Rosa would come back and things would go back to the way they were before. While the Navarro family prepared for a clean victory, the real investigation seemed to be ignored. Rosa tried to gather anything that might help prove her innocence. She asked a neighbor to go back with her to the house to check something. She remembered that there were security cameras near the room where the money was kept. But when she asked about the footage, no one gave her a straight answer. Eventually, she learned something strange. The camera that recorded the room had been turned off at the exact time the money went missing. That detail seemed important, but nobody was interested in it. Rosa told a court official about it, but he said it wasn't relevant without evidence of who turned it off. Rosa didn't know how to argue. She wasn't a lawyer. She had no idea who could help her investigate more deeply. That discovery left her more confused. Why would a security camera be off during a robbery? Carmela didn't let anything slow her down. She pushed for the trial date to be moved up, wanting everything to happen quickly. Her lawyer followed her instructions perfectly. He prepared statements to show how trustworthy the Navarro family was and how suspicious Rosa had always been, even without evidence. Carmela spoke to journalists and made small off-the-record comments that suggested Rosa had done this before. Some magazines published rumors that Rosa had money problems or a secret debt, which wasn't true. Rosa saw her image being destroyed more and more every day. The people who once greeted her on the street now looked away. Even some former friends stopped returning her calls. Rosa felt like the world had turned against her, and she hadn't even had the chance to speak. She kept telling herself she was innocent, but with everything going on, it seemed like no one wanted to listen. The system had already made its choice before she could defend herself. As the trial day approached, Rosa felt a heavy pressure on her shoulders. She barely slept at night. The newspapers still called her a criminal. Her court-appointed defender barely talked to her, and, when she did, she acted like her case was just another file on her desk. Meanwhile, Carmela made sure the courtroom would be full of reporters and important people. She wanted the public to see that no one steals from the Navarro family and gets away with it. Dante still didn't speak. He watched everything happen and told himself it was too late to stop it now. Isabella also stayed quiet, but still thought about Rosa every night. On the outside, it looked like the Navarros had already won, but inside Rosa, something was still alive, the need to prove the truth. Even with the odds against her, she decided she would fight. She stood up on the morning of the trial with fear in her heart, but ready to face everything. Rosa arrived at the courthouse early in the morning. She wore her old work uniform, the same one she used every day when she worked at the Navarro mansion. It was all she had. She didn't have money to buy fancy clothes or pay for a proper lawyer. Her hands were shaking, but she kept her back straight. Inside the courtroom, people whispered as she walked past. Some looked at her with pity, others with judgment. She sat alone, holding a small bag with a few documents. Her eyes were red, but she fought back the tears. She didn't want to cry in front of everyone. The judge walked in, and the trial began. On the other side of the room, the prosecutor stood up. He had been hired by Carmela Navarro and was ready to follow her plan. He called Rosa an opportunist, someone who got too comfortable inside a rich house and thought she could take what didn't belong to her. Rosa just listened silently. As the prosecutor continued, he painted Rosa as someone who had taken advantage of the Navarro's trust. He said she had used her position in the house to steal something valuable. He used words like ungrateful, calculated, and fake loyalty. The courtroom was quiet as he spoke. People were listening carefully, and many nodded along as if everything made sense. But Rosa knew those things weren't true. She had never stolen anything. Still, without a proper lawyer to defend her, she had no way to stop the accusations. The prosecutor showed photos of the missing money and described its value. He explained how Rosa had access to the room and made it sound like only she could have taken it. Then he brought in witnesses, people who had worked in the mansion or knew the family. Most of them said things that supported the Navarros' side. Some even changed their words a little to match what the prosecutor needed. The truth didn't seem important. Dante sat near his mother, his arms crossed and his eyes staring at the floor. He didn't speak. He didn't even look at Rosa. He had memories of her being kind, caring, and loyal, But he was confused. His mother had told him that justice needed to be done, that Rosa had betrayed them, and now everything was happening so fast. He felt stuck. If he spoke up, it would go against Carmela, and he didn't have the strength to do that. So he stayed quiet. Every time Rosa glanced in his direction, hoping to see something in his eyes, maybe regret or support, Dante looked away. He was clearly uncomfortable, but he kept his distance. Meanwhile, Carmela sat beside him with confidence. She whispered comments to her lawyer, smiled when things went her way, and acted like the outcome was already decided. For her, this trial was more about power and control than finding the real truth. Rosa's voice didn't seem to matter. In the back of the courtroom, Isabella sat with her nanny. She wasn't supposed to be there, but she insisted on coming. No one really noticed her at first. She watched the adults talk, argue and accuse. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. Rosa, the person who once held her hand when she was scared, was now standing in the middle of all this. Isabella didn't believe she had done anything wrong. She remembered how Rosa always helped others and never asked for anything, but no one asked what she thought. She had to sit quietly watching the people she loved fight in a way she didn't understand. The courtroom felt cold to her. Everyone looked serious. Even her father didn't smile. Isabella kept her eyes on Rosa the whole time. She didn't say a word, but inside she wished she could run up and hug her. She didn't want Rosa to feel alone. But children can't speak in court. Outside the courtroom, the media was waiting. News cameras were everywhere, and reporters shouted questions to anyone involved. Headlines had already labeled Rosa as guilty. Maid steals from Mafia family and Navarro's betrayed by servant were written in bold letters across websites and newspapers. No one waited for the verdict. The story had already been told, and Rosa was the villain. People online posted angry comments about her. Some called her greedy. Others said she planned the whole thing from the start. Rosa didn't even have a way to defend herself. Her face was on the news. Her name was trending. And her life was being destroyed in front of the entire country. She felt like she had no voice. She wasn't famous, rich or powerful. All she had was her truth, and nobody wanted to hear it. Still, she kept her head up. She reminded herself of her values, of her late mother's advice, and held on to whatever strength she had left. When it was Rosa's turn to speak, the courtroom went quiet again. She stood up slowly and walked to the witness stand. Her hands were cold, but she didn't shake. She took a deep breath and looked at the judge. Then she looked straight ahead and spoke clearly. She said she never touched anything that didn't belong to her. She explained how she had worked in that house for years, giving her best every day. She said she had loved Isabella like her own daughter and never imagined hurting the family. Her voice cracked once, but she didn't cry. She spoke from the heart. She said she knew people had already made up their minds, but she had to say the truth anyway. As she talked, most people didn't react. Some looked bored, others skeptical. It was as if her words had no weight. No one clapped, no one showed support. When she finished, she sat down again, alone, as if nothing she said mattered. As the trial continued, small inconsistencies started to appear in the case. During the first days, everything seemed to go exactly as Carmela Navarro had planned. But slowly, some details began to stand out. Some people close to the Navarro family were suddenly unavailable or reluctant to speak. The old housekeeper, who had worked at the mansion even longer than Rosa, was mysteriously removed from her position. No one explained why. When Rosa's court-appointed helper tried to reach her for a statement, the woman refused to comment. Then one of the younger maids quietly told someone that she had seen Carmela entering the money room late at night, shortly before it disappeared. But the maid quickly backed off, saying she was afraid of losing her job. Fear was everywhere. The more Rosa heard these fragments of truth, the more confused she became. She knew something didn't add up, but without support, she had no way to dig deeper or prove anything. Inside the mansion, things weren't as calm as they looked. Isabella had been paying close attention to what was happening. Although she was still very young, she noticed the sudden change in how adults behaved around her. People whispered more, avoided certain topics, and changed the subject when she asked questions. Isabella started remembering something that had happened the night the money disappeared. She had seen someone moving near the money room when she got up to get water. But when she told her grandmother what she saw the next morning, she said it was just a dream and not to mention it again. At the time, she believed her. But now, after seeing Rosa in court and hearing how she was being treated, she wasn't so sure anymore. Isabella tried to talk to her father, Dante, about what she remembered. She waited for the right moment and finally approached him, but Dante seemed distracted and didn't listen. Isabella felt invisible. Carmela began noticing that Isabella was acting differently. She asked more questions and didn't seem interested in the toys she bought her. At first, she ignored it, but soon she realized she was thinking too much about Rosa and the trial. She decided to act quickly. She told Isabella not to worry about grown-up problems and started spoiling her with new video games, treats, and a promised trip to the amusement park. She hugged her more often and told her how special she was. But behind all the affection, Carmela was trying to maintain control. She feared that if Isabella spoke up, someone might start asking questions, so she kept her close and distracted. When Isabella mentioned again that she remembered something from the night of the theft, Carmela smiled and said she believed her, but that it was better not to say anything. She said people might get confused and blame her. Scared, Isabella stopped asking and kept her thoughts to herself. Rosa, on the other hand, was running out of hope. The trial wasn't going well, and her court-appointed defender barely talked to her. Every day she went to court feeling smaller, as if nothing she said mattered. She still wore her old uniform because it was the only formal clothing she had. People stared at her like she was already guilty. One afternoon, when she returned home, tired and emotionally drained, she heard a knock at her door. A young woman stood there, holding a folder. She introduced herself as Emily, a new lawyer just starting her career. Emily had been following Rosa's case in the news and felt something wasn't right. She said she didn't have much experience, but she believed Rosa was telling the truth. Rosa was surprised. No one had believed her in weeks. Emily asked if she could represent her officially. Rosa hesitated at first, but quickly agreed. She had nothing left to lose and needed someone, anyone, who was willing to help. Emily began reviewing everything she could about the case. She stayed up late, reading the court transcripts, watching the news reports, and writing down every detail Rosa shared. She noticed how many statements seemed inconsistent. She also found it strange that no one had questioned why the main security camera in the money room was turned off that night. Rosa told her about the maid who mentioned seeing Carmela, but they didn't know how to find her. Emily took notes, made a list of people to talk to, and promised Rosa she would do her best. She went to the courthouse to file the paperwork to officially replace Rosa's old defender. The judge agreed, even warning Emily that this case was complicated and risky. Emily didn't back down. She knew she was inexperienced, but she believed in justice and in giving people a voice. Rosa felt for the first time in weeks that she was not alone. Emily's presence gave her a small but powerful hope. While Rosa and Emily worked quietly to prepare for the next steps, the Navarro mansion remained full of secrets. Some of the staff were clearly nervous. Some maids avoided eye contact. Some stopped speaking to each other entirely. Carmela acted as if nothing was wrong, controlling everything with a smile. Dante, meanwhile, stayed quiet and distant, still unsure of what to believe. Isabella kept thinking about the night she saw something, someone walking down the hallway. She knew what she saw. She didn't know how to explain it, but she wanted to help Rosa. Every time she saw Rosa in court, her heart felt heavy. But her grandmother's warnings kept playing in her head. She didn't want to cause trouble or make people angry, so she stayed silent. Carmela continued to watch everyone carefully, especially Isabella. She gave her more gifts and said nice things, but it was clear she was hiding something. The truth was close, but still locked inside the mansion. Emily started her investigation with care and patience. She visited the courthouse archives and asked for every document related to the Navarro mansion and the supposed theft. As she read through the reports, she noticed small mistakes that didn't make sense. Times didn't match. Notes from officers were incomplete, and the record about the broken camera seemed too vague. It looked as if someone wanted to hide more than they revealed. Emily compared the information with Rosa's statements, and things didn't align. Rosa had always been clear about where she was that night, but the reports ignored some of her words. Emily returned to Rosa and asked more questions, writing everything in her notebook. The more she learned, the more she realized this case was not about a simple theft. Something deeper was being covered up. She decided she needed to go to the mansion to look around and maybe find answers that were missing from the official papers. While Emily was busy with her investigation, Isabella continued to feel restless. She had questions that no one seemed willing to answer. One afternoon, while Carmela was sitting in the living room reading, Isabella gathered courage and asked again about the night the money disappeared. She said she remembered something and wanted to know if Rosa was really guilty. Carmela lowered her book, stared at her coldly, and told her to stop asking. She said adults had solved the matter and children should not get involved. Isabella didn't back down. She asked again why she was near the money room that night. Carmela's face hardened. She warned her that if she kept insisting, she would send her away to a boarding school far from home. Isabella froze. The thought of leaving her father terrified her. Carmela leaned closer and repeated her warning. Isabella stayed quiet after that, but the fear inside her grew stronger. She knew her grandmother was hiding something, but she also knew she was dangerous. Dante, meanwhile, was under growing pressure. The media kept asking questions about the case, and people outside the family began to whisper that the Navarros were hiding details. The trial was becoming a spectacle, and Dante couldn't escape the attention. One night, he sat alone in his office and opened old recordings stored on his computer. He wasn't looking for proof about the money. He wanted to remember better times. As he scrolled through the files, he found a video of Rosa with Isabella, recorded shortly after his wife's death. In the video, Rosa was sitting with the girl in her room, comforting her while she cried. She told her she was loved and safe, holding her until she calmed down. Watching the scene, Dante felt something shift inside him. He realized Rosa had been more than an employee. She had been family. For the first time, he doubted his mother's certainty. Maybe Rosa wasn't guilty. Maybe he had been wrong. Emily's search led her to an important discovery. She managed to speak with someone who had attended a charity event a few days after the night the money supposedly disappeared. That person told her they saw Carmela Navarro wearing exactly the same jewelry that had been bought with part of the stolen money at the event. Emily was shocked. If Carmela was showing off at the gala, then the money was never really stolen. She quickly looked for photos or news articles from the event, and for a short time she found one picture online showing Carmela in a dark dress with the jewelry shining around her neck. Excited, she saved it and prepared to add it to Rosa's defense. But the next day, when she checked again, the photo was gone. The website had removed it, and the source refused to talk. It was as if the evidence had been erased overnight. Emily realized that Carmela's influence reached far beyond the courtroom. She had power to make things disappear. The loss of the evidence frustrated Emily, but it didn't stop her. She returned to Rosa with the story and explained what she had found. Rosa wasn't surprised. She always suspected Carmela had more to do with the case than anyone admitted. Hearing that the jewelry had been seen in public only made her more certain. Emily promised to keep searching, even if the picture was gone. She suggested they try to contact other guests who were present at the event. Maybe someone else had noticed the jewelry. Rosa agreed, even though she felt the walls closing in around her. Each day in court was harder, and the accusations grew louder. She had almost no allies except for Emily and her memories of Isabella. Rosa thought about her often, hoping she still believed in her. For Emily, the missing evidence was not an end, but a clue. Proof that Carmela was desperate to keep the truth hidden, which meant they were getting closer. Inside the Navarro household, Carmela also began to feel the pressure. She could sense Dante's silence was not the same as before, and Isabella's behavior made her uneasy. She knew Emily was digging into the case, and even if the young lawyer was inexperienced, she feared persistence could lead to results. Carmela told herself she had to act before things got out of control. She tightened her control over the staff, warning them not to speak to anyone outside. She kept Isabella busy with gifts and distractions, though her eyes betrayed her doubts. With Dante, she used guilt, reminding him of family honor and responsibility. Carmela's determination grew stronger. She had built her life on power and reputation, and she would not allow a servant to destroy it. But for the first time, cracks were showing. People were asking questions, and secrets were harder to control. Carmela realized the circle was closing in. If she wanted to protect herself, she would need to take drastic action. On the third day of the trial, the atmosphere inside the courtroom was tense. The judge sat in his chair. The lawyers prepared their notes, and Rosa tried to remain calm, even though she felt broken inside. Emily whispered encouragement, telling her to stay strong. The Navarro family occupied their usual seats, with Carmela looking confident as always. Dante sat quietly, his expression unreadable. The trial was moving forward like the other days, with the prosecution continuing to attack Rosa's character. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the courtroom opened, and Isabella slipped inside. Having escaped from the nanny who was supposed to watch her, people turned in surprise as the girl ran straight to Rosa. Without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around her waist, holding her tightly as if to protect her. Then, in a loud voice, she pressed her small hand over her mouth and said, "Shh, I know who did this, Mommy." The entire courtroom froze in shock. The sudden outburst created chaos in the room. Journalists raised their cameras, people murmured, and the judge called for order. Rosa froze, holding Isabella close, unsure of what was happening. Carmela's face turned pale, and Dante immediately stood up. The judge asked for the girl to be removed, but Dante interrupted. He stepped forward, his voice shaking as he said that Isabella should be allowed to speak. He explained that his daughter had been quiet for weeks, holding something inside, and now she needed to be heard. After a short hesitation, the judge agreed. Isabella looked around nervously, then at Rosa before speaking again. Her small voice filled the silence of the courtroom. She said that one night, after waking up for water, she saw her grandmother Carmela in the office. She saw her holding something shiny and hiding it inside a box. She also heard her whisper to herself that Rosa would be an easy target. Her words made everyone in the room go silent again. The prosecutor quickly tried to take control of the situation. He stood up and argued that Isabella was just a child, too young to understand what she saw or heard. He said, "Children often confuse dreams with reality," and reminded the court that memories could be unreliable. Carmela leaned back in her chair, trying to regain her composure, but her fingers tapped nervously against her armrest. Isabella, however, did not back down. She insisted she was telling the truth. She described the box where Carmela had hidden the money, a dark wooden box with a golden lock kept inside her office desk. She also repeated the exact words she had said, "Rosa will be an easy target." The details were too specific to ignore. People in the courtroom exchanged looks, whispering to one another. Even the judge frowned, realizing that Isabella's testimony could not be dismissed so easily, especially because of the precision of her account. Rosa stood frozen, her heart racing. She couldn't believe Isabella had spoken up in front of everyone. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness this time, but from relief. For the first time since the nightmare began, someone had told the truth out loud, and it came from the person she loved most in the world. Emily immediately reacted, rising to her feet and telling the judge that Isabella's statement was crucial and must be investigated. She pointed out that the girl had no reason to lie and that her details matched with the inconsistencies already found in the case. The judge agreed to pause the session and ordered an inquiry into Isabella's testimony. Dante, standing nearby, looked torn between shock and guilt. He finally dared to meet Rosa's eyes, and what he saw there made him lower his head in shame. He realized how blind he had been to the truth and how much Rosa had suffered unfairly. Carmela, who until then had controlled every part of the process, showed her first signs of weakness. She tried to stay calm, but her lips trembled slightly as she whispered something to her lawyer. Her confident expression was gone, replaced by unease. For years she had manipulated situations, silenced voices, and shaped reality to fit her desires. But now her own granddaughter had spoken against her, and she couldn't stop her. Journalists scribbled notes furiously, some already preparing headlines about the shocking twist. Reporters whispered that the perfect Navarro image was falling apart. Dante sat still, visibly shaken, while Isabella leaned against Rosa, holding her hand tightly. Carmela finally raised her voice, saying, "Isabella is confused and has been manipulated by Rosa." But her words lacked their usual force. Everyone could see her composure cracking. The mask she had worn so carefully was starting to slip, and for the first time, people questioned her role in the case. The judge announced that the trial would be temporarily suspended. He said Isabella's testimony raised serious questions that needed to be investigated before moving forward. Officers were instructed to review the office in the mansion and check for the wooden box Isabella described. Emily smiled faintly at Rosa, whispering that this was their chance. Rosa, though overwhelmed, felt a wave of hope. For weeks, no one had believed her, and now the truth had finally begun to surface through Isabella's courage. Carmela sat in silence, her body tense, her hands clenched together. She knew the circle was closing in. Dante placed a protective arm around his daughter, still unable to process everything he had heard. The courtroom emptied slowly, filled with tension and whispers of change. For the first time, Rosa walked out not as a defeated woman, but as someone who might still have a future. And beside her, Emily knew the fight had only just begun. With the investigation now open, the Navarro mansion felt different. Tension grew in every corner of the house, and for the first time, Dante decided he could no longer stay silent. He waited until Isabella was asleep and then went to his mother's office. Carmela was sitting behind her large desk, pretending to read, but she knew why he was there. Dante closed the door and demanded the truth. His voice was firm, louder than he had ever spoken to her before. He asked why Isabella had described her actions so clearly, why the box the girl mentioned matched details no child could invent. Carmela looked at him with sharp eyes, but she realized her control over him was slipping. Dante pressed again, telling her he could not continue defending her if she didn't explain. The air between them was heavy, and finally, Carmela stood up. She began to speak, her voice calm but filled with bitterness, ready to confess her reasons. The conversation quickly turned into a heated argument. Dante accused his mother of destroying Rosa's life without real evidence. Carmela answered by saying that Rosa was getting too close to Isabella, filling a role that didn't belong to her. She said Isabella saw Rosa as a mother, and even Dante looked at her differently, almost as if she was replacing his late wife. Carmela's tone was cold but emotional. She admitted she felt threatened. She feared Rosa would take control of the family, and she couldn't allow that. Carmela explained that she never intended to cause so much damage. Her original plan was only to scare Rosa, to remind her of her place. But things escalated when the money went missing. Once the suspicion fell on Rosa, she let the lie continue, thinking it would protect her family's legacy. Dante listened in silence, devastated. He realized how much his mother's fear had blinded them all, and how his silence had made him part of the injustice. Dante walked out of the office in shock. For years, he had trusted his mother completely, but now he felt betrayed. He remembered every moment Rosa had shown kindness and how he ignored it under Carmela's influence. He went to Isabella's room and sat beside his sleeping daughter. He thought about how Isabella had been braver than him, speaking the truth when adults stayed quiet. That night, Dante made a decision. He went back to Carmela's office, not to argue, but to search. He opened drawers, moved books, and finally discovered a small safe hidden behind a cabinet. After several attempts, he managed to open it with a key he found in Carmela's desk. Inside, he saw bundles of money carefully wrapped in cloth. But that wasn't all. The safe also contained envelopes with more money, documents, and other items that didn't seem to belong there. Dante stared at the contents, realizing this was the proof that could finally change everything. The next morning, Dante didn't hesitate. He carried the safe to the police station and handed it over. The officers were surprised, but they immediately began taking notes and recording the evidence. Dante explained where he had found it and how it confirmed Isabella's testimony. He admitted that his mother had been hiding the money and possibly other valuables. The police thanked him and promised to include the discovery in the investigation. Dante felt a mix of relief and guilt. He had done the right thing now, but it came too late to undo the damage Rosa had already suffered. Outside the station, reporters were waiting, and news spread quickly. Headlines changed overnight. Instead of calling Rosa a thief, the media began to focus on Carmela Navarro's involvement. The public, who had been so quick to judge Rosa, started questioning the family's power and secrets. For the first time, Rosa's name appeared alongside words like innocence and injustice. This time, things were different. Emily presented the discovery of the money and explained that it had been found hidden inside Carmela's office safe. She also pointed out the other suspicious items, suggesting there could be more behind the story. The judge allowed Rosa to speak again, and she told her story with more confidence than before. Her voice was steady as she repeated that she had never stolen anything. She talked about her years of loyalty, her love for Isabella, and her respect for the Navarro household. The courtroom listened closely, and this time people didn't dismiss her words. Reporters wrote down every detail. Cameras focused on her face, and even members of the public who had once believed she was guilty now began to feel sympathy. Emily's arguments grew stronger, supported by the physical evidence. The entire case shifted, and Rosa was no longer seen as the accused, but as a victim of a powerful family's lies. Carmela was forced to sit in the courtroom and watch the truth unfold. For the first time, her control was gone. She didn't speak, her eyes fixed on the floor as the prosecution tried to recover but failed. Dante sat on the other side, holding Isabella close, finally breaking free from his mother's influence. He felt ashamed for not protecting Rosa sooner, but he was determined to support her now. Isabella, though still a child, felt proud that her voice had made a difference. Rosa, standing tall, looked at them both with mixed emotions. She had suffered humiliation, pain, and fear. But at that moment, she saw a path toward justice. The people who once turned their backs on her were beginning to see the truth. The weight of lies was finally lifting, and for the first time, the future didn't seem hopeless. The case was far from over. But Rosa finally had proof on her side, and the world was starting to listen. With the safe evidence and Dante's testimony now part of the case, the courtroom atmosphere changed completely. For weeks, Rosa had sat in silence, treated like a criminal, but now the weight was shifting in her favor. Emily stood before the judge with a carefully prepared presentation. She showed a timeline of events, starting with the night the money disappeared and ending with the discovery of Carmela's secret safe. Every step of the story revealed how Carmela had manipulated the situation, creating a false narrative that made Rosa look guilty. The prosecution tried to interrupt, but the judge allowed Emily to continue. The evidence was too strong to ignore. Rosa, sitting beside her lawyer, felt her hands shaking, but this time from relief. For the first time in months, she wasn't invisible. Her truth was being spoken out loud in front of everyone. She lowered her head and whispered a quiet prayer, thanking for the chance to finally be heard. The judge listened carefully, taking notes as Emily explained each point. She showed how Rosa's access to the money room had been exaggerated, how the broken camera had been conveniently ignored, and how witnesses were influenced by Carmela's power. Emily then connected these details with the jewelry being seen at the charity event, tying the pieces together. Dante stood and confirmed his part, admitting his silence had made him an accomplice. His words were heavy but honest, and the courtroom reacted with murmurs of surprise. Carmela, sitting in the front row, remained stiff, her lips pressed tightly together. She avoided eye contact with everyone, especially Dante and Isabella. The judge finally raised her hand and declared that the process had been flawed from the beginning. She said Rosa should never have been held under suspicion for so long without proper evidence. With that, she announced Rosa's immediate release. The courtroom filled with noise, some gasps, some applause, as people realized the tide had turned. As soon as the decision was spoken, Isabella broke free from her nanny's grasp and ran across the room. Without hesitation, she jumped into Rosa's arms, holding her tightly. "You're my heart, Mommy," she shouted, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. The words touched everyone present. Some people cried, others clapped softly, moved by the child's honesty and love. Rosa hugged Isabella with all her strength, tears streaming down her face. She whispered to her that she would never leave her, no matter what people had said before. For Rosa, that moment meant more than the judge's ruling. It was proof that she still had Isabella's love and trust. The journalists captured the scene, their cameras flashing, and within minutes the image was spread across the media. A woman once condemned was now embraced as a symbol of hope and resilience. Rosa didn't think about reputation or headlines, but about the girl who gave her strength to keep fighting. Outside the courthouse, the media exploded with the news. For weeks, headlines had called Rosa a thief, a liar, and a disgrace. Now, those same outlets wrote news stories describing her as brave, strong, and innocent. Television anchors spoke about injustice, while online articles praised her dignity throughout the ordeal. Comment sections filled with people apologizing for judging too quickly, and some even called Rosa a symbol of resistance against abuse of power. For Rosa, however, the noise of the media wasn't important. She didn't want fame or revenge. All she wanted was her name cleared and her life back. She told Emily she didn't plan to sue the family or demand money. Her only goal was to walk freely without shame and to live without people whispering behind her back. Emily admired her humility, knowing many in her place would have demanded more. Rosa's victory was not about punishing Carmela, but about regaining her dignity. Dante took the opportunity to address the press gathered outside. He admitted publicly that he had failed Rosa by believing his mother without proof. He explained how he had allowed her influence to silence him and how his silence had caused harm. Reporters asked difficult questions, but Dante didn't hide. He apologized directly to Rosa, not as part of a legal strategy, but as a father and a man who had been wrong. Rosa listened quietly, not answering right away, but her eyes showed she appreciated his honesty. Isabella stood by Dante's side, smiling for the first time in weeks. The girl's relief was visible, as if the heavy burden she carried had finally been lifted. For the first time since the trial began, father and daughter stood together, united in truth rather than in fear. Rosa felt grateful for Isabella's courage and for Dante's change of heart. For her, their sincerity was enough to begin healing. Carmela, however, could not escape the consequences. The judge announced that she would be called to a new hearing to answer for her actions. The discovery of the money, the manipulation of witnesses, and her attempt to frame Rosa were now part of a new case. Carmela didn't react outwardly, but her pale face betrayed her shock. She was escorted out of the courtroom by her lawyer, who avoided the press at all costs. Reporters shouted her name, demanding answers, but she said nothing. Rosa watched from a distance, not with anger, but with a sense of closure. She had no desire to hurt Carmela further. Her only wish was to be left in peace, to rebuild her life, and to give Isabella the love and security she needed. When the day ended, Rosa walked out of the courthouse free, holding Isabella's hand. Justice had finally begun to restore what had been broken, and a new chapter in her life was ready to start. When the court reconvened, Carmela made one last attempt to regain control. She raised her head high, spoke with authority, and tried to convince the judge and the jury that everything being said against her was false. She insisted Isabella was confused, Dante was emotional, and Rosa was manipulating the situation through sympathy. For a moment, the courtroom was quiet, but then Emily stood up with documents and testimonies she had gathered. She presented written statements from staff who had left the mansion, people who were now willing to talk. With Carmela's influence weakened, they admitted details they had been too afraid to share before. One maid confessed that Carmela had pressured her to lie during the first hearings. Another employee revealed Carmela often used intimidation to control the staff. Slowly, Carmela's arguments fell apart piece by piece. The more she tried to defend herself, the more her words looked desperate and hollow compared to the solid evidence in front of everyone. As testimonies continued, shocking details from the past came to light. It was revealed that this was not the first time Carmela had accused an employee of theft without proof. Years earlier, a driver had been dismissed under similar circumstances, accused of stealing valuable items that were never actually proven missing. Another worker admitted she had been threatened by Carmela after refusing to cover up an incident. The courtroom gasped as these stories surfaced. They painted a pattern of behavior that showed Carmela's obsession with control and her willingness to destroy others to protect her image. The prosecutor, who at the beginning of the case had been firmly on her side, changed his stance. He asked for a criminal investigation against Carmela, listing charges such as perjury, defamation, and obstruction of justice. The judge nodded and agreed that the matter could no longer be ignored. Carmela, who once appeared untouchable, now sat in silence, exposed in front of everyone. Rosa listened to everything, tears in her eyes. Not tears of pain this time, but of relief. After so many humiliations, so many days of doubt, she was finally hearing the truth acknowledged in front of the world. The judge declared her officially innocent, clearing her of all charges. The courtroom erupted with noise as reporters quickly sent the news across the country. On live broadcasts, Rosa's name appeared with words like "innocence confirmed" and "justice done." For months, she had been called a thief, but now the nation saw her as a victim of lies and cruelty. Rosa held Isabella's hand tightly as she left the courthouse, no longer ashamed. Outside, people clapped. Some even apologized to her directly for believing the false accusations. She felt a weight lift from her chest. Her life had been broken apart by lies, but her name was clean again. This was all she had wanted from the beginning, not revenge, but truth. The days after the verdict brought Rosa unexpected attention. Job offers began arriving from wealthy families who admired her resilience. Some offered generous salaries, others promised comfortable housing and stability. But Rosa politely declined each one. She told Emily that she needed time to rest, to heal, and to decide her future without rushing. She had spent too long living under the shadow of others' power and accusations. Now she wanted peace. She dreamed of spending quiet days with Isabella, walking freely through the streets without fear of whispers or judgment. Emily supported her decision, knowing that Rosa deserved the freedom to choose her own path. Rosa was not interested in becoming a symbol or living in the spotlight. She only wanted to reclaim her life and dignity. For the first time in months, she could wake up in the morning without fear of what people thought of her. That was her true victory. Emily's role in the trial did not go unnoticed. Lawyers, judges, and even journalists praised her determination and courage. She had entered the case as an inexperienced young lawyer, unsure if she could handle the responsibility, but she had proven herself capable. Newspapers began calling her the rising star of justice, and law firms reached out with offers. Emily, however, remained humble. She said the case was not about her, but about fighting for someone who had been treated unfairly. Still, when Rosa hugged her and thanked her with tears in her eyes, Emily allowed herself to feel proud. She had made a difference, and that was why she had chosen to become a lawyer. In private, she admitted to herself that the trial had changed her too. She now knew she had the strength to face powerful people and win. Seeing Rosa free was her greatest reward, and she carried that moment in her heart with gratitude. Meanwhile, the Navarro family faced a new reality. Isabella asked Dante if she could spend more time with Rosa, saying she felt safe with her. Dante, though hesitant at first, agreed, realizing it was what his daughter truly needed. He had seen Rosa's love for Isabella, and he no longer doubted her intentions. For Dante, the trial forced him to look at himself differently. He regretted his silence and the blind trust he had given his mother. He decided to rebuild his values and his relationship with Isabella, putting honesty before pride. Carmela, on the other hand, was left isolated. Friends distanced themselves. Her influence in society collapsed, and she now faced her own criminal charges. The woman who once controlled everything had lost her power. Rosa, Emily, Dante, and Isabella walked out of the courthouse that final day with their lives changed forever. Lies had nearly destroyed them, but truth had given them a second chance. Carmela entered the courtroom, but this time she was no longer the accuser. She was the one standing at the defendant's table, facing the same justice system she once controlled with her money and influence. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The money had been found inside her own safe. Testimonies from former employees confirmed her history of intimidation and lies. Records also revealed money transfers and valuables hidden without proper documentation. The prosecutor listed the charges clearly: false accusation, harassment, and misappropriation of family assets. Carmela sat still, her once proud posture now heavy with shame. She tried to defend herself, saying everything she did was for the good of her family, but her words carried no weight anymore. The judge listened, considered the facts, and then gave the verdict. Carmela was guilty. Her sentence was strict but fair. House arrest, a heavy financial penalty, and permanent removal from any control over the Navarro fortune. Dante watched the trial with mixed emotions. He had grown up obeying his mother's every word, but now he saw her stripped of the power she had used for so long. When the sentence was read, he didn't feel joy. Instead, he felt a deep sadness, knowing how far she had gone to hold on to control, but at the same time, he knew it was necessary. Justice had to be done. Once court was adjourned, Dante officially stepped into his new role as the leader of the Navarro businesses. Reporters asked how he planned to move forward, and his answer surprised many. He said the family empire would no longer operate with arrogance or fear. He promised to lead with transparency, fairness, and respect for all workers. For Dante, this was not only about saving the family's reputation, but also about repairing the damage caused by years of silence. His first step was to rebuild trust, starting with Rosa. Dante reached out to Rosa personally. He met her not as an employer or accuser, but as someone who respected her strength. He told her he'd been inspired by her courage and by the injustice she endured. He shared an idea for a foundation dedicated to helping women who had been falsely accused or unfairly treated just like her. Dante admitted the idea came from seeing Rosa's suffering and her determination to keep her dignity. Rosa listened carefully. She didn't want to return to the mansion or to her old life as a servant. But when Dante explained she would not work as staff, but as the director of the foundation, Rosa smiled. This was different. It was a chance to use her painful story to help others. Rosa accepted not out of obligation, but because she believed something good could come from everything she had endured. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one she chose freely. Emily celebrated Rosa's decision as much as Dante did. The young lawyer saw her former client now stepping into a leadership role that she fully deserved. At the foundation's announcement, journalists called Rosa a symbol of resistance and dignity. But Rosa herself avoided those titles. She insisted she was just a woman who wanted to live honestly. Still, she worked with Emily to shape the foundation's mission, providing legal aid, emotional support, and opportunities for women silenced by power. Dante provided the funding, but Rosa made the rules. She was no longer cleaning floors or living under suspicion. She was directing meetings, hiring staff, and planning campaigns. For Emily, watching Rosa grow into this role was proof that justice wasn't only about courtrooms. It was about giving people back their voices. The foundation became a living example that the truth could survive even against wealth and influence. And Rosa's name now carried respect, not shame. Isabella adjusted to the changes better than anyone expected. She still spent time with her father, visiting the Navarro estate when necessary, but she preferred being with Rosa. She told her once, in her innocent way, that she was her real mum in the heart. Rosa smiled and told her she would always be part of her life. Dante supported their bond, understanding that Isabella's happiness depended on feeling safe and loved. He no longer tried to erase Rosa's presence from their lives. Instead, he encouraged it. For Isabella, the two worlds finally made sense. The luxury of her father's side and the warmth of Rosa's care. She knew exactly where love and truth lived. Whenever she looked at Rosa, she remembered the courage it took for her to stand strong when everyone turned against her. Isabella's laughter returned. Her nightmares faded, and she once again felt like a child, free to dream. As the months passed, Rosa learned to breathe again. The fear that once followed her disappeared. She walked through the city without shame, no longer hiding from people's eyes. She worked hard at the foundation, but also allowed herself moments of rest, surrounded by Isabella's joy and Emily's friendship. One evening, after a long day, Rosa stepped outside and watched the sunset. The colors in the sky reminded her of everything she had survived. She thought of the courtroom, the lies, the humiliation, and the pain. But now she was free, and she didn't need to shout or fight anymore. The truth had spoken for itself, and it had won. Rosa closed her eyes, letting the peace sink in. For the first time in a long while, her heart was calm. The story that began with accusations ended with justice. The sun disappeared slowly, and Rosa smiled, knowing she had found her place in the world again. The months that followed brought profound transformations. The Rosa Torres Foundation, as it was named by Dante's insistence and Rosa's approval, began to operate in a modest but well-located building in the city centre. The walls were painted in light colors, and the reception had comfortable sofas where women could sit and finally feel they were in a safe place. Rosa arrived early every morning, wearing simple but dignified clothes. She didn't wear uniforms. There were no more bosses. She was the leader, and that still surprised her sometimes. But she learned quickly. She listened to the stories of the women who came, many of them echoing her own experience. False accusations, powerful employers, lack of resources, fear. Emily worked alongside Rosa as chief legal counsel. She put together a small team of young lawyers, all willing to work for just causes, even when cases seemed impossible. The foundation offered free legal representation, therapy sessions, and even professional training so these women could rebuild their lives. Dante kept his word. He funded everything without interfering. He understood that this was Rosa's way of making peace with the past, and he respected that. Sometimes he visited the foundation, always accompanied by Isabella. The girl loved being there. She drew with the children who came with their mothers, and Rosa watched her with tenderness. The relationship between Dante and Rosa changed. There was no more hierarchy. They talked as equals, sometimes about Isabella, sometimes about the foundation. Dante asked Rosa for advice on how to lead with empathy, and she, without realizing it, had become a kind of mentor to him. Carmela, for her part, lived reclusive in one of the family's smaller properties. She rarely received visits. Dante went to see her once a month, more out of obligation than affection. Isabella refused to go. The conversations between mother and son were short and cold. Carmela never apologized, and Dante never expected her to. The press continued to follow the story. Documentaries were made. Rosa was invited to television programs, but she declined most. She didn't want to be a celebrity. She wanted to be useful. However, She accepted an interview on a high-audience program where she spoke calmly and clearly about her experience. "I'm not special," she said in front of the cameras. "I'm just a woman who refused to accept lies as truth. And if my story can help a single person not to give up, then it was all worth it." The words touched millions. Messages came from all over the country. Women wrote telling their own stories, thanking Rosa for having fought, for having given voice to what many felt but couldn't express. Isabella grew up happy. She spent weekends with Rosa, and during the week stayed with Dante. She called them both family. At school, she spoke about Rosa with pride, and the teachers commented on how mature and empathetic the girl was for her age. One afternoon, Isabella asked Rosa, "Do you still get sad when you think about what Grandma did?" Rosa took a deep breath before answering. "Sometimes, yes, but sadness doesn't control me anymore, dear. I chose to move forward, and you helped me with that." Isabella smiled and hugged Rosa tightly. "I'll always help you, Mama Rosa." Emily, for her part, became a respected lawyer. She received awards, was invited to lectures at universities, and even wrote an article about the Rosa Torres case that was published in an important legal journal. But she never forgot where it all started. An inexperienced young woman believing in the word of a woman the world had abandoned. Once, during lunch with Rosa, Emily confessed, "I was afraid of failing. I thought I wasn't good enough to defend you." Rosa held her hand. "But you were, and you are. You gave me something I thought I had lost forever, hope." The foundation expanded. A second office was opened in another city. Rosa traveled there for the inauguration, accompanied by Isabella and Emily. It was an emotional day. Women of different ages attended, some just to thank, others to ask for help. One of them, a young woman in her early 20s, approached Rosa and said, "I read about you. I was about to give up on my case. But when I saw that you won, I thought, if she could do it, I can too." Rosa hugged the young woman and whispered, "You will make it. I promise we'll help you." And they did. Case after case, the foundation proved that it was possible to face power and win. It wasn't always easy. There were defeats. But each victory, however small, reinforced the mission. Dante also changed. He restructured his businesses, moving away from questionable practices and investing in legal and transparent sectors. He knew the Navarro name was tarnished, but he was determined to restore it honestly. He hired external auditors, opened the company's books, and began treating his employees with dignity. Carmela's old associates disappeared. Some were arrested, others fled. Dante cooperated with authorities whenever necessary. He didn't want more secrets. He wanted peace. Isabella, now a year older, wrote an essay at school titled "The Bravest Woman I Know." She wrote about Rosa. The teacher was so touched that she asked permission to share the text with the class. Isabella agreed, proud. When Rosa read the essay, she cried, not from sadness, but from gratitude. Everything she had gone through, all the pain, the humiliation, the despair, had been worth it, because in the end she hadn't just recovered her dignity, she had inspired others to do the same. One night, Rosa was alone in her small apartment. She had moved from her old house to a better place, with Dante's help. It wasn't luxurious, but it was hers. She made tea, sat on the balcony and looked at the stars. She thought of her mother, who had died years before. "I did what you taught me, Mother," she whispered to the sky. "I kept my dignity, I told the truth, and I won." The wind blew gently, as if it were an answer. Rosa smiled. She knew her mother would be proud, and she, finally, was at peace. The story of Rosa Torres didn't end in that courtroom. It continued day after day, in each woman she helped, in each injustice she fought, in each child she taught never to give up on the truth, and in Isabella, who grew up knowing that true love doesn't come from blood or wealth, but from courage, kindness, and loyalty. Isabella would carry that lesson forever, and one day she too would fight for those who needed it, because Rosa had planted a seed. And that seed grew, flourished, and spread its roots everywhere. Justice wasn't just a verdict, it was a way of living, and Rosa Torres was living proof of that. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.